The girl in room 2A, more like the very adult and very hot Italian brunette in room 2A. I think that's what they meant to say. Hi guys, so the other night I watched a giallo film for the first time in ages and it felt so fresh. I mean, this film is not going to challenge the likes of Deep Red and Tenebrae when it comes to quality, but just the fact that I hadn't watched a new one of these in so long, it made for such a fun experience. Although I would say that this film only barely qualifies as a giallo. So to give you an idea of the plot, we've got this young woman who is just being released from prison at the start of the story. She's not like a proper criminal. She was only in for a petty misdemeanor, and I think even that might have been a case of mistaken identity. But when we see her come out of prison, she's dressed really smartly. She looks all sleek. She's got nice straight hair. She doesn't look like somebody who is fatigued from years of doing sexual favours for tattooed women, let me say that. She looks like somebody who's just leaving an office block, to be honest, to go on her afternoon break. But she moves into this apartment building because she's got nowhere else to go. It's kind of like a halfway house for recently released female cons, I suppose. But the trouble is, there's a sinister local cult who have been occasionally kidnapping women from this very same hotel and then taking them off, torturing them with a weird poker-like device and then chucking their bodies off a nearby cliff. And we see this happen in the prologue to a poor blonde woman. It's quite brutal, actually. So this main character, Margaret, she gets wind that there's something weird going on in this hotel. I'm not entirely sure where she gets that impression, come to think of it. Probably she's just got a copy of the script in the back pocket of her jeans, maybe. But she starts to look into what might be going on under her nose. And she's helped by this bloke who turns up, who's basically the brother of the woman who dies in the prologue, I think. So he's looking for his missing sister. And he joins forces with Margaret. The two of them have a little romance, which is nice. But can they get to the bottom of what's going on with this cult before Margaret herself becomes a victim? But like I said, this is only just about a giallo film, I would say. I normally think of such films as having one or maybe two killers whose identities we don't find out until the end of the movie. Well, here we see the faces of all the cult members quite early on. We get to know their names as well. But there's one person in the cult whose identity is kept from us, a mysterious person in a red balaclava. And I guess just because of the presence of this one character, I'd say that this film can call itself a giallo, plus it's an Italian production, that always helps. But this red balaclava is freaky. Very, very much reminds me of what the Scorpio killer wears briefly in the film Dirty Harry. That sequence where Harry's getting bounced all over town in the dead of night, and then he comes across Scorpio in the park with his red balaclava. Best sequence in that entire franchise for me. And seeing another creepy red balaclava in this film made it no less effective the second time around. As hinted in the intro, the leading lady here is an absolute stunner. Her name is Daniela Giordiano, and she seems to be able to actually act as well. I don't know why I'm so surprised. Now, there's a sex scene about halfway through this, and it includes full nudity, which surprised me. But I found out from another review of this movie that when it came to the nude stuff, Giordiano refused to do it, and so they brought in a model so they could still have some nudity. So in that scene, I believe, there's a little bit of Giordiano, presumably the headshots, and also a different woman when it comes to the nudity. And I find this a really weird approach to doing a sex scene. I don't approve at all. I think they should have just kept Giordiano in the scene completely, but removed any nudity. I think you get a much more powerful scene that way. I mean, if you look at something like the end of Terminator, when Michael Biehn and Linda Hamilton are getting it on, that's one of the most powerful sex scenes in movies that I can remember. It's, you know, they've built this relationship throughout the film, and you've got this dramatic music, and suddenly there they are in the hotel room, possibly sleeping with each other for the one and only time because they know the Terminator's on their tail. It's a great scene, but take Linda Hamilton out of there and bring a model in just so we can have the odd little boob shot. I think you're going to ruin that scene completely. So, like I said, I don't approve of what they did here with the sex scene in the girl in room 2A. Although I will admit that I think Terminator is a lot more highbrow than this random giallo film from the early 70s. There is that. Now, I don't know if the sex scene takes place in room 2A. I can't remember. But if it does, then it's very fitting, because a lot of the best material in this film is in room 2A, where Margaret's staying. There's some terrific dream sequences. At one point, Margaret's asleep, and Red Mask, as I'm now going to call him or her, they come in the room, and it's kind of freaky. But then I thought to myself, is this actually real? Does Red Mask come in the room just to sort of check out the new girl in the hotel, and then, we'll kidnap her later, but just want to get a quick glimpse of her for now? It's kept ambiguous, and I like that. And even later on, when there is an attempted abduction of Margaret, the way that the killer is revealed from the shadows of the room is very, very clever, I think. A lot of the stuff to do with the cult throughout this movie is very effective, and this is despite the fact that a lot of their identities are just given away straight away. I think the reason they're so good is because every time we cut back to the cult, they're doing something different. Something new is happening that's just putting us on the back foot as a viewer. We're constantly getting new info that may or may not be important. So, for example, they mainly kill women in this film, right? That's their MO, and yet at one point they just kill a random middle-aged guy. I think he's part of their team, so to speak, but he's betrayed them in some way, although we don't get the full details of that. But we see him die, which is a little bit just kind of random. And then later on, there's a scene where Margaret stumbles into a room full of, like, weird masks. And at first I'm thinking, oh my God, what's this got to do with the actual plot? But then I think it turns out that actually, this is just a cult member who likes to make masks in his spare time. It's got nothing to do with the activities of the cult. And also, right at the beginning of this movie, the first victim is kidnapped outside the hotel in broad daylight, which just makes you think, well, okay, so anybody could be taken at any time of the day, at any part of the hotel, which is quite a neat thing, because I think otherwise you'd just assume that the cult will come for women in the dead of night, and as long as you bolt your door in the witching hour, then you'll be all right. But absolutely not the case. There's some good deaths towards the end of this as well when it comes to the actual cult members. If I haven't said it already, there will be mostly spoilers today, although I will refrain from telling you the identity of Red Mask, but I think the reveal is extremely satisfying. I definitely approved of who it turned out to be, and I totally didn't guess it. But there's two particular deaths towards the end that I like in this film. One of them, this random person who's carrying a torch, just ends up sort of burning their own face with a torch. And the death of Red Mask, they fall off a cliff into a quarry, and it's just a delightfully spectacular end for this particular villain. Before I forget, I've got to mention that the leader of the cult in this bears an uncanny resemblance to the actor Ian McShane, who plays Winston in the John Wick movies. I mean, their facial features, they're just so similar. It made me chuckle a couple of times during this. Although the funniest moment overall comes during an early scene where Margaret is literally leaving the prison, and just to convince us that it is actually a prison in the background, they've had these two convicts fall out with each other just over the wall somewhere. So you just hear this one random woman shouting, "You bitch!" or something like that. But it's just so out of the blue, and I just find it hilarious that they've paid this one extra to shout that from wherever it is that she stood. But it doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, if a couple of women are going to be arguing inside a prison, you'd think it would be back in the main population area somewhere. Why are they stood by the gate where people get released just to have this random spat? But I'm definitely overthinking this. Now, I've been mostly positive about this movie so far, and that's because the broad strokes of the whole thing are absolutely fine. Decent protagonists, a good set of villains, some interesting setups, and a pretty good plot on the whole. So all the main things about this film are pretty good, but there are some downsides, mostly quite small, little plot holes here and there, a few things where there's evidence of a rushed production, possibly. If I had to name the worst thing about this film, it would be the change of tone about 20 minutes from the end. This does become a little bit of an action fest towards the end. We got all these people storming the villain's lair, a bunch of blokes ganging up, and there's loads of fight scenes and stuff, and I would have preferred just having maybe one guy creeping into the lair late at night, keep it feeling like a horror film. There's also a plot hole of sorts where, okay, so just after the sex scene, Margaret and her boyfriend are grown really close by this point, but then Margaret goes back to room 2A where she knows it's dangerous to be, and the boyfriend goes back to his hotel, which is definitely safe because the cult aren't operating in his hotel. So why don't they just stay at the boyfriend's place, or at the very least have the boyfriend come over and stay in room 2A for a bit of protection, right? There's also a bit of a trope that pops up here. Now, this film came out in 1974, so I'm not going to count this as a proper bit of criticism, but as somebody watching this in the year 2024, I did sort of roll my eyes a little bit and think to myself, oh God, not this again. What I'm referring to is the fact that we have a character here who escaped the cult in the past, and now she's locked up in a mental asylum because she's never been able to get over it. And so she's just there as a convenient giver of exposition. And we've seen this in films recently like Final Destination 2, well, semi-recently, The Ring 2, and no doubt there are other examples as well. But like I said, back when this film came out, maybe it never been done before, for all I know. There's also a dodgy bit of plotting towards the end. So the boyfriend, he gets captured, but instead of killing this guy, for some reason they take him to an abandoned car, tie him up on the back seat, and then they put a box with a dangerous snake in it on the front seat, and then they leave the car, and I guess they're sort of assuming that the snake will get out of the box and kill the guy. They're just going to assume that everything goes according to plan. But it's just a bit silly, and it's not like these characters are against killing people, male or female. We've seen them be pretty brutal in the film up to this point, so why are they suddenly coming up with this like James Bond snake pit situation? It's just extremely weird, but on the whole, still enjoyed this film, and despite all the little nitpicks, I'd say that my scales of positivity are still leaning the correct way. I've got one more minor niggle, actually, and it's to do with the motivations of the cult. They are essentially killing women who have committed petty crimes and only gone to prison for small stretches of time. It doesn't really stand up, you know. If these victims had been female murderers who had been released from prison due to a technicality, maybe, then by all means, put together a Magnum Force style posse and go and hunt them down. Second Dirty Harry reference today for you. But as it is, I just don't think we have a strong enough reason for this cult to have been put together in the first place. Now, I don't have a copy of this film to show you. I watched it on Shudder. You can see it on there for free if you've got a subscription. I did do a little bit of research about the film in my spare time, so I found out that thing about the nudity, and also there's this weird thing with the dubbing in this. So I watched this with English dubs, which is the only way to watch it on Shudder, I think. But after about half an hour, the characters suddenly started speaking Italian, and I had to quickly rush for the remote to put the subtitles on. And then the next scene, we were back to English dubs again. And I thought, okay. And then 20 minutes later, it happened again. Suddenly, the characters are speaking in Italian, and I had to reach for the remote. But this was the last time that it happened. So twice during this movie, it will suddenly switch to people speaking in Italian, and it's pretty strange. But the reason why the film does that is because apparently there was a normal version and an international version, and only the content in the shorter version was dubbed, but it's the longer version that's ended up on Shudder, and so we've got these two scenes which are in different places of the movie that have no dubbing recorded for them, so you have to watch those two scenes in Italian. It won't ruin the movie for you, but just be forewarned that you will have to randomly put the subtitles on twice. But it's an odd situation. I don't think I've ever had this with a movie before. I don't mind watching a film with English dubs, and I don't mind watching it spoken in a foreign language with English subtitles. Either way is fine by me, but it's got to be one or the other. You can't just mix and match. That's just going to get annoying. But, you know, there we go. Right, shall we get to the bag of terror and see what sort of score I'm going to give for this? So, we've got 1, 2, 3.5 bloody axes out of 5. Not one of the best shallow films out there, but I still had a really good time with it. And if you're into this subgenre, then I would say check this out. I think you'll get you'll get a lot out of this one. Right. Anybody for a reading update? So I've been going through the novelizations of the Alien films this year. I've done the original trilogy, and now, as of the other night, I have also read Alien Resurrection, the fourth one, and I had a really good time with this. Alien Resurrection has always been my least favourite Alien movie, even worse for me than the Alien vs Predator films, but reading this novel, I think it's given me a new appreciation of it. I'm actually looking forward to watching the movie version now, because this novel was pretty cool. It's done by a different guy who wrote the original trilogy of novelizations. What you get is still the same story of Alien Resurrection, but somehow the characters are less shouty and annoying in the way that it's been written here. And I just thoroughly enjoyed going through this tale from a brand new angle, a brand new perspective, and yeah, it was cool. I don't have a copy of it to show you because this one I read on Playbooks, I think it's called. I can't remember the title of the website that I use. I do have copies of the other three books, the original trilogy, but yeah, it was actually better for me, this experience, than reading the novel of James Cameron's Aliens, which I never would have predicted coming into this, but hey-ho. But I'm going to take a little break from Aliens and go back to Stephen King. My next book is going to be Cujo, so I will come back at you with a quick mini review of that in the coming weeks, I'm sure. But for now, I will say bye-bye.